Hello, hello, everyone. It's Wednesday, where we spend our time talking about culture and astrology with Ricky Williams and rando guests. Today, we have a I guess we're very excited about is Anna Fraser. And Anna came to us through just different stuff at the school, but definitely has stood out as a thinker and a scholar. She is a professor herself and a writer and all these things. So we're very excited to have Anna's thoughts today. Um, all right, Anna has picked a very interesting topic, which is stelliums. Okay, so we're going to try to weave stelliums with cultural awareness. Now, Anna, let's let you start and talk about your passion for stelliums. What is it and what do you got going on?
Sure. Stelliums, as we understand them in astrology, is when you have three or more planets in one sign. It comes from the Latin stella, right? Multiple stars. Some people will include points like north nodes or, um, asteroids in their stellium. It's fine, whatever works for you. It's always a very loaded part of the chart. And when you get a transit to a stellium, um, that's going to be a place that is really, really activated. And that'll happen by squares, oppositions. If you're looking at lunar transits, it's an area that is going to be all your eggs are in one basket for better or worse, depending on uh, the transit, worse being subjective.
That is so true. The rhythm of the life of a person who has a stellium is so different than like somebody who has a splash chart and has like one planet in every house. Like the stellium people are just like bam, bam, bam. Like they have a Mars transit and then it's just like another Mars transit, another Mars transit and stuff. So Ricky, what do you think of stelliums? What do you read about them?
Honestly, I make fun of stelliums. Oh, no, no, no. I don't make fun of stelliums. I make fun of the term. I make fun, not the term. I make fun of the way astrologers use the term.
Okay, how so?
Because we can, in Vedic astrology, they have things that they call yogas. And yogas are certain combinations that tend to produce something. And they have like your mom is gonna die young yoga. It's kind of morbid, but it's interesting. But the idea of naming configurations and acting as if because we name them, they become a thing of in and of themselves. And I think it takes us away from the basic logic of what a stellium is made of. And so, to me, to simplify it, the term I like to use is intensity. And it's true that by transits and activations that will be activated, but that's what creates the intensity of the person. I think people sometimes separate uh, event based astrology and psychological astrology. And for me, it's hard for me to see them as different. Is that the major events in our lives are what shape and create our psychology.
Interesting. Yeah, so I guess we could look at, well, okay, so you mentioned I love intensity. I was thinking of the term hyper focus. Where if we look at it from a body systems perspective, a stellium has a focus of energy or chi in one body system. If we have a stellium in Pisces, like Edgar Casey, the sleeping psychic, he just had all this energy in his auric field. I mean, like he's just constantly living out in this aura. And so I think it does create like a superhuman in some ways.
Well, I think it creates the potential for it, but someone has to be able to respond well to it. And I think this is where astrology can help. If someone is given permission to be intense, and especially if they're educated on the energy of the sign and or the house where the stellium is located, because it gives them clarity of where to put their energy. And I think if intensity is what creates greatness, if it's put in the right place, but also intensity can create the other side of the story.
That's such an interesting concept, like an informed use of your stellium versus an uninformed use of it. Like, do you become an expert in that body system, that core value, that kind of thing? So, Anna, you said you've done some research on stelliums. What does your research entail?
Yeah, I'm just want to mirror some of what I'm hearing. I Extreme living, definitely. I heard that from Rick, and I was wondering, how do people that have that intensity and have stelliums that don't know that's what's going on? What is that kind of secret life like? That would be really interesting to watch. And Rick brought up a really interesting point about psychological versus transit astrology. And I just have to give a shout out that I've always really found Western astrology as being great at the personality deep dive. And yeah, but Vedic astrology for nailing those transits. And I think of James Braha when I think of kind of a nice hybrid of, because ultimately we want to know, when are we going to die? When are we going to fall in love? When are we going to make more money? And my first exposure, to answer your question, to really thinking about my stellium, and it's crazy because I don't think it's a topic that gets a lot of attention in astrology. I can't tell you how long I had been practicing astrology or had professional readings, and nobody ever mentioned to me that I had a stellium until Saturn was transiting Virgo. And like all people kind of at sea, as it was hitting each one of these planets, I went to an astrologer who was like, "Oh yeah, you have a stellium." By the way, she didn't like Virgos, um, so that. But I knew something was going on, and so the research that I've done um, has not yielded everything that I would hope, because I had just, there's not a lot out there. Donna Cunningham has a book, a two-part book out there on stelliums. It's a PDF. It's probably even free. It's called the Stellium Handbook. Mostly what I've tried to do is go and look at who are historical figures, living and dead, that had stelliums. Where were those stelliums? What signs, what house? And did that sync up with what I knew about that person? And I have a little list if you want to hear some of the people. Um,
Sure.
what, yeah, go ahead.
Well, maybe we should ask a question just early on in the episode here. How would different cultures look at hyper focus differently? Yeah, is or intensity, or
Yeah.
do we have anything to say about the cultural piece of this?
I think that is such a good question, because I think in late stage capitalism, we have very little room for magical thinking or shamanistic um, approaches to living that we find in indigenous cultures. And where do we put those people, right? If that somehow cannot be harnessed to produce something. Like, it's really great if you have a lot of Virgo and you're making widgets, but if you don't have that, or say you're a researcher, or I saw a lot of artists with a lot of water stelliums. Carl Jung, let me see if I can find him here. Um, some people Terrence McKenna had a Virgo stellium. Jeff Buckley had no, we're not going to count that. Carl Jung had a lot of uh, planets in both Virgo and Cancer. So I feel like it's a fast track to a lesson that you're going to learn with or without the help of the culture. And if you are For example, one of the transits that I'm experiencing right now is that, I've been really separating from groups, right? I mean, you can see that with a lot of my Virgo stuff, and Uranus about to go into Gemini, and the Sun there right now. It just pushes you. You're going to evolve with or without your cooperation. In the West, in urban areas, I'm not going to say West isn't a blanket, because there are lots of like village and rural lives that still hold a lot of secrets. I think people are more open to ethereal ways of being and seeing the universe as a living organism, and our place in that. But, I think these unseen energies and ways of thinking and ways of experiencing consciousness right now, I mean, other than people like you making a space, don't really exist or aren't well respected.
Interesting. Ricky, do you have any thoughts on the culture and hyper focus?
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things I think to take into consideration, and it's not always the case because there's a lot of stelliums that are the sun, moon, and Venus, but in this case, stellium includes slower moving planets, and so it represents a birth chart, represents a moment in time. And so I think one way to reflect on, especially a stellium like this, one way to reflect on culturally is what was going on in the culture at this time. I think it's cool to read newspaper articles from our birth date. Because we were so young, everything was unconscious. We weren't really clear of the moment we were being born. And I think like anything, but astrology especially, we see it through the lens of our own beliefs and our own philosophies. So if someone has the philosophy that the purpose of life is to learn lessons, then when they look at a stellium, that's the lesson. But to me, I think it's more of a reflection of who we are, what we're made of, what we're made for. And that's why I'm saying if I see a stellium, it's like, I think a person is lucky because they know where to put their energy. I think to me, it can be more complicated when like a splay chart where you're being pulled in a lot of different directions. But when kind of everything is focused, yeah, to me, it's easier because you know where to put your energy.
You guys are making me think of the culture of autism, where in autism culture, like hyper focus is like one of the things that's said about autistic people. Like, and I think autism culture has reclaimed a lot of the negative traits of these things, So it's like, according to in the autistic community, if you had a stellium, you'd be like totally a superstar, hyper focused machine of whatever. Like, let's say you have a stellium in Cancer, and you're just like cooking and cooking and cooking and cooking. The autistic people would be like, this is a total like hyper focus on chef work,
Yeah.
But like if we see a kid with a stellium in Cancer and they're just in this like kind of neural normal framework, the mom might be like, well, all he does is cook, and I don't know, like I can't get him to do anything else, and like I feel like we do. I don't know if we pathologize hyperfocus, but I think there's this idea that we should do all things in life, and the little bit there's like somebody who has a bunch of planets in Aries might focus on athletics to the detriment of another thing, right? They don't cook for themselves, they hardly eat, they don't do much, they just like go out and run laps. And we could either pathologize that, or we could say what a beautiful thing. And it kind
That's
of
what relationships are for, right? We're not supposed to be all things. That wouldn't make sense. So I'm thinking of like focus. A lot of times we think of focus as what we focus on, but also something can be a magnet, and the magnet can attract things, and that's a form of focus. So I think one of the things about a stellium is I think planets. I think of planets a lot of different ways, but I think they're attractors, they're magnets of experience, and the experience, the way I would qualify the experience is like an astrological energy. So we could say there's Venus experiences, there's Mars experiences, or there's Aries experiences and Aquarius experiences. So I think if someone has a lot of planets in a certain sign, they are attracting a lot of that sign energy that is in their current environment, in their current culture. So I think they become great examples of, like, for instance, if you want to understand Virgo energy in a certain culture, you find someone who has 5 planets there, and you're going to get a good sense because their life experiences have attracted so many Virgo experiences from their environment.
Oh my God, just making me think like what a cool experiment, right? To take stelliums in different cultures and say like what is, because like if you have like 5 planets in Cancer and you're in Japan, you might be this Japanese chef of sushi and kind of thing. But if you're in America, you might be making cheeseburgers and and so I love that idea. That's good scientific research is stelliums.
Rick, yeah, I love that. I put a little pin in that, and research will be happening. There must be um, examples that are accessible to me, if not um, already in a database. At least if I could get the birth data, that would be really, really interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've often wondered about charts of, I don't know how you said it. Um, yeah, it was reverse engineering. What is their person's role in the local culture? And then seeing if I can see that in the chart. And while I have a couple of great astrologers here, I have a question. Somebody had said this to me, the astrologer Linda Rose, and I don't know where she got it. I have not been able to um, confirm or deny. It's just a seed that I've been sort of carrying around for over a decade. The idea that the energy of stelliums often will blow out the other side of the chart and the other side of the coin. And I have seen examples of that, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
All right, so for me, I just feel, I kind of feel like it's just making something up, because it's two sides of the coin. To me, if all the energy is on one side and we assume that's where the energy is supposed to be, then who cares about the other side? It's not that important. If it was, there'd be more planets over there.
Okay, well, I would think of it, you're done, right? Okay, so I have to think of it from like scientifically of like, okay, so I think if you have a collection of planets in Gemini, your chi will live in the Gemini regions, which is the arms and hands and the throat chakra. So you're in this Gemini region. When are we going to see it blow out the other side? Well, when transits come from the opposite sign of Sagittarius, we get an opposition, which ignites your Gemini, Gemini, but also like Judith Hill talks about in her books about like the opposite like in the human construction, like when a baby's in the womb, the shoulder correlates to this hip, and this elbow correlates to the knee, and there is actually the reflex action in the chart that comes through the like the energy body, right? So if somebody is super Gemini and they have a transit through Sag, they're kind of gonna be high energy when the planets are in Sag because of that reflex action. But I do think they are scientifically living in the ear, nose, and or this throat chakra area. I don't think that they're gonna be living in the hip as we would see it, but I do think the transits in Sagittarius are going to be formidable for that chart, and so in that way, it looks like it's blowing out the other side.
By definition, at least the way I look at it, if we're saying that transits to the other side, it would also include people in their life that have a lot of planets in Sagittarius.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like how it's not, and I honestly don't have an opinion. I don't really, I don't have enough examples to work with, only some anecdotal ones. But I do think, for example, it's one I'm going to just be mulling over for a while. I think of how it's not uncommon. I often see Sagittarius and Gemini kind of hanging out together. They seem to love to pair. I also think about how it's not uncommon at all for people to find love interests with planets or people that you would see on their descendant. So there might be something to it, and I'm not entirely sure. I know for myself that creative projects will often come out. I think about like where does all that energy go, even in a resting state, even if there's not necessarily um, an aspect happening just in the resting processing state. What is going on there? So, but I appreciate the thoughts, and I don't know. She's somebody that I really, really loved, and she just said it to me with such confidence, and I've never heard anyone else discuss it, and I have no idea where it came from.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, we bring our own biases or beliefs into astrology and we view through. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's an incorrect statement. I just say it to me, it's more interesting that someone would make the statement, that someone would be even looking at the other side. It's the same, like the same thing I notice. A lot of people, the first time they see a chart, they say, what are those empty areas for?
Yeah, interesting.
And and
So,
my teacher, he teaches where you got planets, you got problems. So just one more thing here. So if someone wanted to talk to me, if someone had a lot of planets in the 11th house and they wanted to talk about the fifth house or they wanted to talk about the other sign, I'd say, well, let's see where the rulers of the cusp of the fifth house are, and see if they're in any relationship to the 11th house planets. And so yeah, having one of the rulers in the 11th house, that's a place to tap into the fifth house where it doesn't have to, you can take a little hose and hook it back up so it doesn't have to blow out. It can just recycle.
yeah, and I think Anna's goes right back to her 11th house, so that
Yeah.
thing there. Okay, so I want to go back to something you guys said earlier. So we are talking about Ricky was talking about the outer planets and creating stelliums and which creates like a cultural wave. It's making me think of that Capricorn generation that has N Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, or not, no, they have Pluto and Scorpio, but they have like Neptune, Uranus, and Saturn in Capricorn or something like that. What is the culture of that generation like being so Capricorn?
Yeah, one thing I want to answer that. One thing I want to say is in this case, the Pluto Uranus moving through Virgo in the 60s, mid to late 60s. And that's a cultural thing and then you say, all right, then there's once in 12 years or once during this cycle, the planet Jupiter is going to be passing through Virgo too. So Jupiter is going to be picking up some of that vibe. And then once a year, the Sun, Venus, and Mercury pass through. And then you say, what about the year that Jupiter is passing through and all the people born with the Sun in Virgo that year? Right? It's like you see that what it's capturing, in a sense, is the essence of what that time really was about. And with this kind of stellium in this place, there's more ability to capture more of the essence of what this time. And capture it, but bring it into the future. And I think that's the beautiful thing because people born here in this time, there's a seed, but that seed continues to grow as it has more experiences and it has the ability to flourish or turn into something else.
Yeah, bravo, absolutely true. I have heard characterizing it as a seed, absolutely spot on. I think I've heard of that Pluto Uranus is sort of the signature. They're like sleeper agents. I mean, at any time, revolution, I have all of that in me. I'm very contained, um, but definitely ready to go at any time with a lot of Aquarian
Yeah.
themes.
Well,
Yeah,
okay.
I would say that's a necessity. I at least when I'm looking at the chart, it's like where it's kind of like I'm saying, it's a need to be a part of a revolutionary group. It's necessary.
So, okay, when I think of that Virgo stellium generation, like I think of a culture that was created by them, the culture of medicalizing things. Okay, like they also did the culture of computer technology advancements. But like here's an example of this is like in transgender theory, all of a sudden when the Virgo stellium generation got older, things started to get medicalized. And it started with like Leslie Feinberg was a transgender activist who had a Sun Saturn conjunction in Virgo and like did a lot of work about like cutting up the body and like surgeries and stuff. And then the Uranus Plutos came in and started doing all these surgeries. And so they're like handling gender with surgery. There's like a medical culture. It also happened in the deaf side of things with the cochlear implant. They said, "Oh, you're deaf. We're going to medicalize that and give you a cochlear implant." And so there became like the medical revolution culture of we can fix all these emotional problems medically or by chopping things up or plastic surgery. And so I do think these stellium generations come in and create a wave in the culture of a certain way of looking at things. You know, it's like now there's all this pushback, like we don't have to do things medically. We don't have to have surgical interventions on certain things. You can, it's every outer planet's going to have different, maybe Pluto and Aquarius will bring a culture of AI being the response to certain things or, kind of thing. But it is interesting to look at how stelliums do influence culture.
But also how they move forward and how they evolve. Back to your question about the this group that has the stellium in Capricorn, and I have a couple students, and I talk to people all the time, and I see it. And I don't know if this is accurate or not, but the one thing I associated with is this thing people call imposter syndrome. You know? And the way I connected it is like when I was a kid, we didn't talk about imposter syndrome. It wasn't a thing, but now it is. And I hear a lot of that generation talking about it. And I think a Capricorn is maturity. Capricorn is the elder. And if this feeling of I'm supposed to be more mature, all right, I feel like I should be older, right? I should, that comes from hard work and experience. So I think if there's a need to be there, but the sense of I'm not there yet, I think in my opinion, it manifests as the imposter syndrome.
One thing I wanted to mention, uh, to Andy's point about the medicalization, I would bring up the author Mary Shelley. I find actually a lot of Virgos think that they can do it better than the medical establishment. And, I think of like wise women and herbalists and a lot of kitchen witches are definitely of that Virgo bent. And that Mary Shelley had I think Sun, Mercury, Mars, Uranus, all in Virgo, maybe her moon, but she also had that Mercury, Uranus, and that was the cautionary tale. You have the extreme of nature on one side, and then the extreme medical scientism on the other. And I will just let that stand as the Virgo answer. I think they can be very critical of that. And yeah, imposter syndrome. That's something I have heard and I've heard with younger people. And yeah, that would be I'd have to look more at what the energy around that is, but I would just always say pull the camera back. I mean, we're kind of this. It's all a pretend. I mean, imposter. I'm pretending to be Anna. I'm
But I think my thing is, so when we hear the word imposter syndrome, we're going to be viewing it through the lens of our own generation, and so that what you're saying is 100% accurate. But when they talk about imposter syndrome, and for me, when I really listen to what they're saying, it's not the same thing that we're talking about being behind the camera. It really is this sense of this deep need. And for me, I think of it as Neptune in Capricorn, because Neptune is the planet that rules our imagination. And then and so if you put your imagination in Capricorn, this imagination that things should be more mature than they are.
Yeah.
Right. And so yeah. So if that's what at least for me, when I feel into it, that's what it feels like. Because the response that I want to say is like, you expect yourself to be an expert when you haven't had any experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. So my experience with that generation was very like they turned the culture around from being like, I'm not racist to you have to be anti-racist. anti-homophobia, anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchy. So, a lot of them are Pluto and Scorpio too. So they're like these raging social justice warriors. And I had a lot of them as students all at once. And like the culture around that school was pretty much like anti-authoritarian in the dismantling of authority, kind of Neptune Uranus conjunction way of just, and it's like they did a lot of stuff with the culture of body modification of just like they went beyond tattoos to start changing themselves into things like my structure is now an animal or I am now an alien or like there was like this kind of like literally dismantling of the structure of the physical body into so it's like I think those stelliums affect everything from body modification to art to the zeitgeist of a time to the like it's just I mean that's one of my takeaways from today is how stelliums do are culture creators of a certain type, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and they're fun. You can play with stelliums. There's so much research you can do. No, I'm looking at this chart, and it's like not all stelliums are made the same. And so I imagine someone who has their sun towards the beginning of a stellium and a bunch of planets later in the sign. It's like sun 8 degrees Virgo, right? Three planets at 28 degrees. It's like when the progressed sun gets to those planets. Wow. I like to choose to look at the progressed sun because it moves slowly and it's very vital, right? It's very like it is the sun, so it's things that are obvious, things that show up powerfully in our lives. And I think this is where the research is done, not only the stellium, but like we said earlier, the transits and progressions when the stellium is most active. And the other line of research that I think is interesting is planets that are not in the stellium, but are in aspect to planets in the stellium. Because that allows the energy of the stellium to directly influence other areas of the chart or of the life.
Yeah, it makes so much. That's such a cool point of like if somebody like Anna has her moon in Sag square all that Virgo, but like so, like somebody had Capricorn moon trine all that Virgo, that's going to be such a different reaction. So maybe like the Sag square is more of the kitchen witch, but the Capricorn moon trine it is going to be more of the traditionalist doctor, like in that generation, right? So they're
Exactly,
fighting,
exactly.
fighting the
Yes.
feeling.
Yeah, I think that'd be really cool research.
Do you have anything else on your list, Anna? Do you want to give us some of the famous people? I mean, you did give us some, but
yeah, sure. Let me see what I can find out. Um, okay, let's see. Um, Princess Diana had a 12th house stellium in Cancer. Um, let's see.
she
David
really brought a
Bowie.
culture around the royal family. I mean, that's
Oof,
so Cancer, like the
yeah.
royal culture of the royal.
Yeah. And bringing hidden secrets to life. Kind of that suffering. Yeah. And I was not surprised to see that. I felt like she really embodied that. And this is just a quick list. Like I didn't look at any life event transit arcs. Let's see. David Bowie, a 12th house stellium in Capricorn, Moon, Mars, and Neptune, which is so interesting. I would not have guessed that, but I guess the 12th house, that ability to like be a chameleon, um, being able to like draw on myths and like that dream imagery, Kurt Cobain, 12th house stellium in Pisces, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Saturn. I mean, that's kind of a textbook
Oh yeah, like the
example.
depressed artist type, or like and being kind of like, yeah, I mean the music culture. We could like say, like,
Yeah.
what, I almost want to say something about these stelliums, which is could they be so hyper focused as to push beyond the culture? I mean, they're going to interface with the culture they're in, but in some ways, even if the culture says like you should get a job in an office, in a cubicle, like Kurt Cobain pushed beyond the culture coming at him because he was so focused in this Pisces region. Like, in some ways it makes you like a machine of a self-made machine because you're so focused that you could push back on culture.
I don't know. I don't know. I think that it's an interesting example of Kurt Cobain because we're talking about Pisces in the 12th house. That's not really in the world. So that would be an intense example of someone that would be out of the world. And I get my point that I was trying to make in the beginning is we can keep saying stellium, but I think if we focus on the idea of intensity, and I think if someone has a stellium, they're gonna, like I was saying earlier, they're gonna be an intense magnet and a reflection of whatever that sign means in that culture. And I think the mistake that a lot of astrologers make is we expect culture or how it's manifesting in the world to match what we read in the books. And I think it should be the opposite. I think we should study stelliums to really understand what is Virgo really all about. Because I trust a stellium of Virgo manifesting in the world more so than I trust a textbook. Textbook can give us points of reference, but I think if I find myself saying it, and I find my students saying it, that something astrologically doesn't make sense to us. And I'm like, well, it's not supposed to fit what the book says, right? That it's just a lens to help you see what's really there. And so I
Unless
think
it's Robert Hand.
exactly, unless it's Robert Hayes.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
Can we say
I love your point of view on it. Yeah,
Can we
I
say
can see
that a
that.
person who has the sun, let's say there's one of these outer planet stelliums, like the Capricorn generation. We just talked to a girl yesterday who is in that Capricorn stellium, and she has her sun on that Neptune in Capricorn, and she makes Hellenistic astrology art. Like that's what her whole thing is. Like she's drawing like zodiacal releasing and all this stuff, and it's like she's like at the heart of this culture of Hellenistic astrologers that came in this generation, because her son's there. So we could be looking in at people whose sun is in the middle of the stellium to say, what is your generation creating with this culture by looking at their lives?
And also it's a subculture of astrologers. And I think how are these stelliums or this intensity, how is it manifesting in these subcultures? Because I imagine if we looked at football players and all the football players that had stelliums, something probably would jump out about the way they played or the way that they lived their lives.
Yeah, I liked what you said, Rick, about it really simplifying the purpose of the person's like life, what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to grow into it is really obvious as opposed to say a chart with a lot of scattered planets. I just will say that I find also it is a bit of being a one-trick pony, and not to make that sound negative, but you're kind of like you're geared up to do one thing, and you're going to do that whether you like it or not. And so there can be a quality of burnout. Um, if that energy is not grounded, I think that can really it can be a lot to hold. Um, so even outside of the cookbooks, just lived experience. There's no question. Like when I was so happy to see Saturn get out of Pisces. Um, and because I was living with a lot of oppositions, which on the positive side is I had a way of manifesting that. I had a way of working with that energy, but I'm a mature woman, whereas I think when people are younger, these energies can come on so strong and fast, and there's no experience or uh, of how to navigate it. You get the test first and then the explanation after.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when I think of burnout, I will say there's a right if something is intense, right? If we're just a little bit off, there's larger consequences. So that's why my advice, if I see a stellium, lean into it, right? Put all your energy there. And if you're willing to allow yourself to put your energy there, you have a greater chance of figuring it out. But if you hold something back, because to me, what's the value of not liking something? That's why I hear people say, I don't like my Saturn. I don't like the Saturn time. For me, I'm like, what's the value of not liking it? You know, it's like, what belief system do you have that not liking something is like valuable?
Interesting. Okay, I have a question. So, Ricky, yeah, in for previous episodes, you're talking about how in African American culture, you felt like the Aries part of you was honored and the Gemini part of you was kind of overlooked, and you felt that that culture really honored, like, the run, Ricky, run part of you, the athletics part of you. Okay, so let's say we get like a stellium in an African American male, 5 planets in Gemini.
Mhm.
So how does that interface with African American culture if you're super Gemini, as opposed to maybe we could say white culture?
Well, you just think, right? Super Gemini means you're attracting, right? You're attracting Gemini experiences from your environment. So it really depends on that environment. If someone is growing up in a neighborhood where, like you see on television where people are selling a lot of drugs, right? The place where someone's quick mind and being able to remember things and make quick connections is valued, right? That's probably where the experiences, at least that help the person feel self-fulfilled, they're gonna attract those experiences. If they're in an area their parents are teachers, right, they're gonna have ample outlet for that Gemini. I think of my son, he's got a stellium in Gemini, and he's 4 and he's already kind of a little astrologer. He knows Mars is the strongest planet and he's all about it. We were on our phones and on the new iPhones you can choose planets as your wallpaper and screensaver. So I put Jupiter on mine, and I put Uranus is on my wife. And Soul was like, "Can you put one on mine?" And I said, "What planet do you want?" And without missing a beat, right? He said Mars. I was like, right? And I gave it to him. He had a big smile on his face. So, we say like African American, but as we move forward in time, that's starting to mean less and less and less relative to the environment. So it just depends where this environment is. If it's in a traditional African American environment where there's an expectation to be an athlete, right? They could be a really intelligent athlete, right? They could be the smart athlete, or they're gonna find a way to express that Gemini energy. They're gonna have to in whatever environment is
And
available to them.
and just to build on what you're saying, they might be more attracted to Gemini cultures than African culture. Like, for example, they might be like really into the engineering
If they
tool.
get exposed to it, if they get exposed to it, yes.
Okay. Yeah, but
But it
like
has to be exposure and support because Gemini can be strong, but that doesn't tell us it's going to be a positive or a negative thing. If an energy is strong, it can just as easily be strong, powerful anti this.
hmm. Well, it makes me think of like certain Asian cultures that are, and I'm not a cultural expert, so forgive me if I'm wrong here, but certain Asian cultures that are very cerebral and are support like cerebralism in men and women, for example. I just think of like computer programmers in, perhaps Asian cultures, like are in some ways that culture might lend itself more to the Super Gemini chart than might African culture. And I mean, that's, but yeah, I mean, because I like what you're saying, like you might not get as much exposure in some cultures to the cultures of your stellium sign kind of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Or they're in that culture. That's something that's not as important. In African American, in slave culture, it was against the law to read. So being intelligent as a slave sometimes got you in trouble, right? Being curious as a slave sometimes got you in trouble. So the little kids that were Geminis, those are the ones that got the most whoopings, right? To try to keep them to try to keep them safe.
Interesting. Anna, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that great examples and a great question. I think about mouthy women in many cultures, even today, even here. The If you have a lot of fire or certain Mercury aspects, saying the thing that's not supposed to be said or inability to conform, that will get you in some places social ostracization, and in other places, your lifespan is reduced immediately now, today.
Well,
That it makes me
interesting,
think
like
of
among
another.
the genders.
It makes me think of another example of genders of that. I often see this, if a guy is talking and he's rambling, no one will really say anything. But if a woman is talking and she starts rambling, there's more of a quicker, stronger response.
Mm.
And one of the manifestations of Gemini, even the best Gemini, right? Sometimes we're gonna ramble a little bit, you know. And so, if you have the freedom to ramble a little bit, you can figure it out. But if every time you start to ramble a little bit, you get a look or you get like, oh, here we go again, then it kind of can shut that down. And so, it doesn't really give the Gemini the same opportunity to develop.
That's such a good conversation. It's like stelliums among genders, right? Like a Cancer stellium in a male versus a Cancer stellium in a female. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like definitely more going to be more accepted on the female side, probably.
My son is has a Pisces stellium in his first house, including his moon, and that's really interesting to watch in somebody that is male presenting on the outside, but seeing how he moves through the world and people's reactions to him.
Yeah. I have a son with the stellium in Pisces too.
Wow. I have a daughter with a stellium in Sagittarius in her first house, sun, moon, and rising in 6 planets.
Hmm.
She is a firecracker, man. I mean, well, am I allowed to say dick puncher on online? That girl's gonna
Too
be
late.
Yes.
damn, like she's just gonna punch the world. Like she's so dumb. Um, but yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, okay, so we're getting somewhere. This is really, okay, we have 7 minutes. Anything, I have a big list that we can talk about, but anything from you guys?
Just really quickly, if somebody's like me, but say 15-ish years ago, and had never really knew what a stellium was and did not know that it was important or that it could be important or say something about my chart, what is the person who's digging around and looking for information? What would we want them to know? What kind of resources? As I mentioned, Donna Cunningham has a great book out that's, I think, available for free online in a 2-part PDF. I would also say that I cannot tell you the number of times somebody that my sign doesn't resonate with me at all. It's like, because I'm a sun in Taurus, or people know their big three, but if you don't really know how to look at a chart, you might be overlooking the fact that, say you have 6 planets in Capricorn. And so that's why maybe that might be the bigger thing to look at in the chart. So I would just say, be looking for those things in your chart. Look for where energy. I like Rick's characterization of this is how, like, we're attracting these experiences to us. We're That's a really useful way of looking at it, that we're here also to bring those experiences out into the world, but we are going to be, like, I'm an Aries North node. The lesson is courage. How do you get that? Because the universe will arrange a bunch of scenarios where you'll get to practice that.
Especially with Mars in the 10th.
Do you have any other thoughts on stelliums, Ricky? And culture?
I I do, but it's the same thing I've said before. I think it's a great, if someone wants to study signs, right? And this is the way I do astrology, is like, I have to remind myself once a week, what is a planet? What is a sign? What is a house? What is an aspect? So I think if someone really wants to understand and study what is a sign, study people with stelliums, because it's gonna, right, there's so many planets, so much power expressing through that sign, that you're going to see the manifestations. And also, I think if someone has a magnifying glass and they want to look a little bit more closely, they can parse apart Oh, this is the Pluto expressing through Virgo. Oh, this is the Venus. This is the Mercury. Oh, this is the Sun. This is the Jupiter. Right? And one of the ways to do that is to go back to the transits and again get the magnifying glass and say, okay, this week it was going over my Sun, and then a couple of weeks later, it was going over my Jupiter, and then a couple of months later, it was going over these planets, and to see what you can see that where the Virgo is still there, but you're starting to see the planetary influence at the same time.
Well, okay, a few takeaways, for everyone listening, I think are a few things. One is that a lot of research can be done with stelliums. We can look at how that sign expresses in each different culture, as Ricky mentioned. And it's like, if you want to know what Cancer looks like in Japan, go study some Cancer stelliums in Japan. If you want to look like what Aries looks like in Japan, go to Japan. The point is like stelliums are a big cultural research opportunity. Um, the other thing is we have to really look at how the culture overlays and values that sign's core value. Like, if Leo wants to show off and you're in a very humble culture, like it might be hard to have a Leo stellium in that culture, right? And so it's like we do want to interface, what is the intensity of this chart? What is the hyper focus of this chart? And then what is the culture it's growing into? Also, what cultures can we find that would honor, what contexts and locations can we find that would honor the culture of that stellium so it can be a culture creator, right? If you're a show off, you incredible Leo chart, let's get you on Broadway. Let's get you on the stage and get you into cultures that would really respect and honor that the culture that you're bringing to the world with your stellium.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think leaning into becoming a exemplar of that sign where the stellium is located, to be an example where people are teaching astrology and they're teaching about Virgo. I got a good example.
Want to see that spreadsheet of my books?
Yeah, and to tell people where they can find you if they want to take your classes, or I know you're a writer and a teacher, so where can people find you?
So you can take a look at my website, annazblack.com. I'm going to be having a book launch this year. It's a collection of short stories with a science fiction or like liminal bent called Time and Other Mistakes, where we try to figure out the universe. And that's annazblack.com. So you can look for that for the actual date and where to buy it and when to buy it. And it's great. You should.
Yeah, I feel like glasses come with Virgo stelliums. Like you have to wear glasses if you have a stellium in Virgo.
Glasses cutie.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Anna. Thanks for bringing us a challenging and very interesting topic in the end. That was a great discussion. So thank you both. And
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rick. Thank you,
Yeah, thank
Andy.
you. This was
all right.
fun.
Bye.
Bye-bye.